Welcome to the Therapist to Millions podcast with Dr. Susan Spicer and Damien Mark Smith, where we interview all kinds of therapists to see what makes them tick as they share their breakthroughs, their most interesting cases and their biggest challenges, and what's working in the world of mental health today. And today, please welcome to the show Elizabeth Jacks Scott, otherwise known as Reverend Betsy, who is the author of Journey to Safe Harbor, an autobiographical account of her own journey back to herself and her family. Now, Betsy taught American and world history for 5 years, practiced psychotherapy and family therapy in New York City. For more than 2 decades, she ran grief groups at St. Bartholomew's Church for 7 years and co-founded Hudson Valley Weddings on the Hill. She is an ordained interfaith minister and a clinical social worker. Scott lives in New York City, the Hudson Valley, and the coast of Maine, and has 4 children and 8 grandchildren. So, Betsy, welcome to Therapist to Millions.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Well, lovely to have you on. You're one of our first ever guests, so congratulations as well. Now,
you know what you're doing.
Now, obviously, you've retired now. So what sort of therapy did you do when you were practicing?
I mostly worked with young adults who worked in Midtown Manhattan, and I worked with people who were neurotic, not deeply disturbed. So I did that for many years.
And now, although you have actually retired, you've kind of carried on working, haven't you?
I decided that I'm so excited by this new parenting paradigm, and it's changed my life so profoundly that I decided I wanted to devote the rest of my life to having groups and coaching people on this new paradigm, because I think it's so important.
Well, that leads quite nicely into our next question, because what life experiences actually kind of shaped your choice of therapy and your work as a therapist?
Well, going way back in my life, in midlife, I was actually found myself suddenly widowed. My husband was in a car crash, and I went to seminary and social work school to heal myself. And then I truly wanted to do the same thing for others, which is really what started me on this long path. And this parenting, I was very surprised, because I always thought I was a wonderful mother and did everything I should do, to find that my children actually found me very difficult and didn't necessarily want to spend a lot of time with me. And that was such a shock that I went and did a lot of work on myself and found that I'd had sort of a difficult childhood, and it was filled with shame, and I had a lot of anger I didn't know about. And so as I was able to heal myself, my relationships with my children were transformed. And I'm so happy about this. And it's such a joy to me that I just had to share what I've learned.
So you wrote the book Journey to Safe Harbor, which came out a couple of years ago now?
Just a year ago.
And so you've had incredible acclaim for this book, to the point where you've actually put it into, or you actually took it to a festival where they were looking for film scripts. Is that right?
That's true. I did. We'll see if I pick it up or not. I don't know. You have to wait and see. But yes, people have really responded to this book and found it's been a great help to them personally. I've gotten so many wonderful letters from people saying it's a wonderful roadmap to your own journey to peace. And I meant it that way. I meant that my particular journey was an example of the universal journey, because I do believe we're all called to take this universal journey home to ourselves. So the safe harbor is that place inside ourselves where we find peace and joy and serenity and hope and faith and love. And if you make, and it's not easy. I think all religions and philosophies are talking about that, like to your own self be true, for example, or the great second commandment, love yourself as your neighbor. So we've been commanded through all time to find this safe harbor. But for me, it was a lifelong journey. And so I'm very happy to have told my journey as an example of this universal journey.
So it must have been very cathartic for you to write it all down.
I learned a lot along the way. You're right. And it's been very gratifying. It took me a little courage to decide to publish it. But once I did, I've been truly gratified at the response I've gotten to this book, that so many people found it helpful.
It is a wonderful book, and it's beautifully written as well.
Thank you.
I wouldn't be surprised if it is turned into a mini series on Netflix, in fact.
You'll see.
So now, using hypotheticals, because obviously, we client confidentiality, using hypotheticals and no identifying factors, what is an example of a success story when you were practicing that kind of brings in the work that you do as a therapist?
Well, I'd like to use my current work as a coach, parenting coach. I can think of a client I'm going to call Shirley. And Shirley has 3 children, and her relationships with 2 of them, and sometimes a third, were very rocky. And she herself always sort of had a angry expression on her face. And when you talk to her about her life, she would always blame, her husband didn't understand, and she would blame her father and mother for not teaching her correctly. And it was filled with resentment. And so I began working with Shirley in a group. I like group work now because the group supports one another. And I began to ask her, well, when you get angry, where in you is this anger? Otherwise, where inside your body is it manifesting? And she'd say, well, my head aches and my stomach is all tight and I ache all over. And I'd say, well, okay, well, what is that telling you? And she began to slowly tune into her own self, something she'd never done her whole life. She'd only been looking and blaming everybody else. And so she finally began to understand that as a little girl, she didn't feel safe or soothed or really truly loved. And she should stop not blaming that little girl, but have compassion on that little girl. Otherwise, to begin to love herself, to understand what she herself has been through, and to begin to forgive her own little self for the things she did and thought about, like turning against herself. And as she has done this work, I can't believe, and this is what's so exciting to me, the whole demeanor of Shirley has changed. Otherwise, she now seems like, if you meet her, you think, well, there's a lovely, charming, happy woman, not this tense expression of anger on her face all the time. And she told me recently that she's now able to actually go with her son, who's has all kinds of difficulties, and just sit with him, not try to fix him, not try to tell him what to do, but just sit with him. And I've come to understand that that's real love. Love is where you actually can be with another person. And love is a place where you actually can listen to them. It's not yourself saying what you should do, but it's taking them in and having empathy and compassion on them and forgiveness of them. And that's love. So as she learned to love herself, she could give that love to her son. And it's transformational. It's been joy to see.
I think it's absolutely wonderful. It's, as therapists, obviously our job is to listen, and to listen without judgment is, I think, really such a powerful skill to learn. What has been, do you think, your biggest challenge in your career, or failure? But what have you learned from it? We learn sometimes from the biggest mistakes we make.
I just have to go back to my own personal life. Is so powerful to me. The fact that I, as a mother, could be so conscientious. I've always been the conscientious good girl in my life, studying other people to see what I should do. And so to always be the one who was, I don't know, taking care of my children, feeding them, clothing them, taking them to wherever they should go, and to find out that they found me so difficult. I can't tell you what a shock that was to me. I can understand how all other mothers when suddenly they find their children angry at them, can't believe it. They think, well, look at all I've done for you. I've spent my whole life taking care of you. I've brought you into this world. How can you be this angry at me? But so many children are angry at their mother. And it was just an unbelievable shock that mine were angry at me. I just found it unbelievable. But then luckily, my daughter came to me one day and she said, there's something I didn't want to do. And I went into my bedroom and was pouting. And she came in and she said, Mother, you're the one that's wrong. You're ridiculous. You need help. And some grace within me allowed me to listen to her instead of getting angry at her and saying, how dare you speak to me like this? Although I thought that in my head, I listened and I went for help. And I said, what am I doing wrong? And that's when I started this long, long journey of finding out who I really was. So it's an amazing experience to find that children that you think you've done everything for are angry at you.
Tell us why you became an ordained minister. What was the reason behind that?
It's what really my life is about. I've been seeking the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, all my life. As a little girl, I was baptized, and it meant a lot to me. And in college, I used to read the Bible a lot. And but then in midlife, when I was suddenly widowed, because I had sort of been, again, the good girl, the good wife, the faithful wife, I couldn't believe that my husband was killed in a car crash. I thought, why me? How could this happen? And so going to seminary, I finally began to understand there were no answers that would satisfy the heart of the person that's been abandoned like I felt. And also, as I went to the bottom of my pit of pain, I found this unconditional love, the Holy Spirit. I just can't explain it except it's grace coming into my life. And it freed me to marry again. And then I began. So although I took all the psychology, I think it's the Spirit. The psychology can help you understand yourself and go into your emotional self, but it's the true change in my life has come through grace, through the Spirit. So I just, as a therapist, felt something was missing in my life if I didn't become a minister also. I just felt I had to do it. And I'm interfaith minister because I have spent a fair amount of time abroad and studying and other cultures and other religions. And I've realized that there are many, although I am, I grew up a Christian, that's who I am. There are many other paths to the Holy Spirit. And I have been enriched through my life through a lot of different spiritual paths. And so an interfaith minister just acknowledges that there are many paths to the Holy Spirit, and we can be fed by a number of different paths, but they all lead to the same place, this safe harbor within ourselves.
I love that. I love that so much. Now, the work you're doing currently, as you said, is working with groups around a new paradigm in parenting. Just tell us a little bit about the JAI Institute, because you've been partnering up with them. Well, how did that come about?
I was looking on the internet for parenting courses, and I saw this JAI Institute and just signed up for it. And I have been just overjoyed to find that what they are teaching is an expansion of my book. Otherwise, they came to the same language that I came to. They talk about the safe harbor being the anchor for the whole family. And so what they're doing is has a whole program of helping people tune into themselves. It's really, and they include quite a bit of scientific research, a lot of attachment theory, a lot of brain science. So they've just done a lot of work in expanding the ways we tune into and find our safe harbor, as they say, and I said myself, the anchor for our families. That was the name of my book. I can't resist showing you.
It's lovely.
It's a picture of a harbor, which,
Yeah.
and I call it, that's a safe harbor, and it's a metaphor for the safe harbor in ourselves. So the JAI Institute has a whole 12-week program, which I went through, and I became one of their parenting coaches. And I just like their material, so I use it, and I stay in touch with them.
Wonderful. So we'll talk about that in a minute, because you're going to be doing a free Zoom call coming up in September.
Yeah.
But just before we do that, so just a couple more questions. So on the subject of books, 2 questions around books. The first one is, what is the best therapy book you've ever read and why? And then subsequently, what's the best other book you've read and why?
Well, can I start with the second one, which is easier for me?
Okay.
Like most people in the world, I have found War and Peace by Tolstoy the greatest book I've ever read. And the reason I found it the greatest book I ever read is because Prince Andrei has this transformation. In this book, he has this. He is engaged to this young woman, Natasha, and then he goes off to war, and Natasha almost runs off with someone else. And of course, he's furious with her. How could she almost betray him? But then he's wounded in battle, and so he's laying down on a gurney, looking up at the sky, and he suddenly realizes it's a spiritual transformation. He suddenly has compassion on Natasha. He said, oh my goodness, she was just this young girl, maybe an 18-year-old girl, and he went off to war for, I don't know how, I've forgotten how long, a couple of years, and left her alone. And he forgave her and had compassion on her, and in fact learned to love her even more. And then there's a scene later on in the book where he's on a train and he's wounded among the wounded soldiers, and Natasha happens to be on that train, and she finds him and she goes to him. He's there, and in the dark she crawls over other wounded soldiers and comes to the bed where Prince Andrei is, and she says, oh, she starts to apologize. Oh, I'm sorry for what I did. And he looks at her and he says, Natasha, there's nothing to forgive. I love you now more than I've ever loved you before.
Wow.
And it's just such a beautiful example of what we're talking about, this transformation, his tuning into himself through, in this case, his own woundedness, and then being able to see truly and love another human being. It's just, I love it.
Well, it sounds like you've actually answered that question in one go. That's amazing.
The best therapy book and the best book I've ever read. Absolutely.
And then, so lastly, before we talk about your Zoom call in September, so tell us a fact that's going to blow our minds, or tell us a joke that's one of a kind, to win a Therapist to Millions t-shirt. That's right, we're doing exclusive Therapist to Millions t-shirts.
I love it. Well, I'd love a t-shirt. Well, the fact that blows my mind is that 30% of college students today are depressed sometime while they're in college, and that the suicide rate is going up, is sky high among this group of young people. And you just think, here these young people are supposed to be in the prime of their lives. They're getting an education, they have a future, and yet they're feeling hopeless and helpless. And it just is such a tragedy, and it blows my mind.
So let's leave on a high note then, which is, what is your tip for mental health in the world today?
Take so seriously that second great commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. There it is. There it's said, and love to me is a presence. It's a listening. It's an affirmation, which means you hear, and a union, which means you actually can feel what is you're feeling, and therefore feel what another is feeling. So if you will take that as seriously, I think it'll transform relationships in this world.
That's absolutely wonderful, and what a lovely note to leave us on. So we have a call coming up in Zoom on the 11th, or Sunday the 11th of September. It's called A New Paradigm in Parenting: The 4 Steps to a Peaceful Home. We're going to put the link to the Zoom call. Anyone can sign up. It's free. Betsy's going to be hosting it. So we're gonna put the link in the show notes and also online for anyone who wants to sign up and come along. And Betsy, just give us a little kind of breakdown of what you're going to be talking about on that Zoom call.
I'm going to be explaining this new what I consider as this new paradigm in parenting, and how it's different from what most parenting has been, which has been behavior modification. Most times when they've been teaching parenting, they've been concentrating on the behavior of the child and rewards and punishments and timeouts and all kinds of things to change the child. And this new paradigm is about the parent tuning into themselves and finding this center, this safe harbor, I call it, when if they've taken care of themselves and they have found this place, they can actually be there for their children in a different way and be curious about why this child is acting the way it is. What's underneath their behavior? It's not, the behavior is just a symptom of who that child truly is. And the course we'll be talking about on September 11th is how is this dramatic change in how you can think about yourself as a parent. And then what are some of the steps you can begin to take to get there? So that's what we'll be doing.
That sounds amazing. And thank you so much for sharing your story today and your wisdom. And we've absolutely loved having you on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. If people want to get hold of you, not only can they sign up for the Zoom call, is there a way to get hold of you through your website?
Yes, the best thing to do is to go to my website, which is the same as my book, journeytosafeharbor.com. There it is. And at the back of that website, there's a place where you can fill out a form and contact me. And I'd love to, I would adore to hear from people who are interested in what I have to say.
Fantastic. And I do believe you can get the first 2 chapters of the book for free on that website too.
I'm giving away the first 2 chapters. I'm having this free seminar. I'm really dedicated to trying to share what I've learned in life with others.
Well, you're an absolute joy and an inspiration. And thank you so much for being on the show today. Reverend Betsy.
Great pleasure. And thank you for all that you're doing, Damien. It's wonderful. And you're a therapist to millions.
Thank you so much.